Everyone, welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Joe Samaniego here, along with Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight. Please subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our programming right here on YouTube and across social media at Grid Network TV and gridnetworktv.com. Big thank you to everyone that invests in the Grid Network through Patreon or YouTube paid membership. Link in the video description to get your name on the leaderboard, and we accept super chats as well. Kobe, we got still more racing, but we got this nice little time in between NASCAR and of course IMSA that just wrapped up. So let's get started with, I think, the big story so far this weekend, especially with the grid ranking. Marc Márquez is back.
Yeah, and I guess you could argue Marc Márquez has been back a few races ago, but it seems like that he's the hottest rider in MotoGP right now with all of the momentum that he's carrying into the summer months. And the scary part is Marc Márquez is already riding at a championship level again, and he's still not 100% healthy from his injuries yet. So Marc Márquez, who is still not 100% yet, is riding as well as he's riding right now. What's he going to look like when he's 100%? Because we know we got the MotoGP summer break coming up, and he's going to have all that time to continue to heal, get better. So when he's at 100%, oh, man, the momentum that he's going to be carrying is going to be absolutely unreal, and the rest of the field should be concerned, as they always should, when you have a healthy Marc Márquez. And it was a typical weekend for Marc Márquez, the Sachsenring, or the German Grand Prix. That is his racetrack. When we talked about it on Wednesday night, we said they should rename the Sachsenring to Marc Márquez Raceway or something, because when you think about Marc Márquez, it's kind of like Joseph Newgarden at Iowa when the IndyCar went there, like Kevin Harvick at Phoenix. That this is just a track and driver combination that clicks just as well as peanut butter and jelly, as Marc Márquez swept the weekend, winning the sprint and the Grand Prix at the Sachsenring in Germany. And after the pair of races this weekend, he's currently third in points, only 18 points behind Jorge Martín, and Augura is 14 points behind the championship lead. And we only have 11 race weekends left in the season, so that means 22 races when you count the sprint and the Grand Prix. And Joe, here's what I want to start out by asking you. Do you think with Marc Márquez, remember when he was 100 points back after the injury, and now, he's really getting there, only 18 points behind. Do you think that this is more so a Marc Márquez climbing back into the championship picture, or is Aprilia just flat out falling apart?
I almost feels like Aprilia is starting to fall apart, because Aprilia, they ended last season looking really strong. They started this season looking really strong. Just looking at Marco Bezzecchi, he won the last two races of last season and scoring points in those sprint races. Then he starts this season with 3 consecutive Grand Prix wins. So he was at a 5-race winning streak. Now, of course, a winning streak has to end at some point, but that was with 2 second-place finishes. So 2 second-place finishes, 3 wins, top of the world. But with this format of the sprint race, it's just one of those deals, Kobe, where you cannot have an off weekend, because if your competition is also doing well, they'll still be up there. And we saw Jorge Martín up there with Marco Bezzecchi. Well, we get to essentially the first race where he doesn't score a podium, a 4th place finish at Barcelona, but then he responds back, wins the Italian Grand Prix weekend. We thought, okay, he's proven he's going to be hard to beat. But then we get to Hungary, retired. Then we get to Czechia, gets suspended for slapping a race marshal. We get to the Netherlands, another retirement. He is starting to slide down the grid ranking from top 10 to outside the top 10. And then here we are in Germany, and he is out, injury, getting surgery, hoping to be back by Great Britain. So I feel like he is dropping the ball when it comes to the competition. Aprilia, their bikes are still fast, but we know the Ducati bikes, they're going to keep working on improving their bikes over and over. And that's what they're showing, Kobe. They are, I think, improving. And when you look at Germany, that is a Marc Márquez track. He's always going to be good there. But then we got Great Britain, Silverstone. That's going to be hard track. You look at Austria. That's going to be a race where, with Austria, horsepower is going to be the big thing. I think they're going to be looking at, again, not Austria, the Aragon motorcycle race. Then we got San Marino and Austria. those are tracks where I feel the advantage Aprilia may have is shrinking down greatly. So I think this is something where for them, it does feel like they're starting to fall apart a little bit, showing some weakness. And this is where Marc Márquez, he could build momentum. And if he runs the British Grand Prix, we're going to be talking about how he's going to be probably the points leader. If he doesn't get it then, Aragon Grand Prix, maybe the San Marino one or Austria. But it's we're at the halfway point, and they're essentially allowing Marc Márquez the opportunity to slide back in because of their missteps.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I feel like that this is. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Marc Marquez. He's riding just like he was last year before he got hurt. When he won the World Championship last year, so Marc Marquez is doing absolutely everything he needs to do, and he's extracting the most he can out of Aprilia. And hello to Jamie from Lake Norman, North Carolina. Happy to see you in the chat again, Jamie. Yeah, but at the same time, when you're looking at the Aprilia factory team, it seemed like one rider can't stay healthy and out of trouble, and the other one, Jorge Martín, I think he's doing as best as he can, but it really seemed like that Ducati is really starting to figure things out as we get deeper in the MotoGP season. Joe, as you mentioned, we got the British Grand Prix coming up. We got racing in Aragon, San Marino, and Austria, and it's really crazy. We're already halfway point through the season because the European season is almost over, and then we got the flyaways. Because I remember when it seemed like just a few weeks ago when we started the European season, and now we get the flyaways, and then come back to Europe to close out the season with Portugal, and then Valencia the season finale. And I think with this summer break coming up, it'll be really helpful for these MotoGP teams and riders to do a hard reset, for the final charge to end the season. And it'll be interesting to see which teams and riders are able to perfectly execute that. And looking at the results, today from the German Grand Prix, one rider, that caught my eye is, Trackhouse Aprilia rider Iogura, who, just recently won MotoGP for the very first time. And I saw one of his interviews after the race. He said he believes he's a championship contender. And I find that, a very interesting situation because it was just announced that he's going to be going to the Yamaha factory team. I mean, I know it's always a big step, for a rider to, become a factory rider. There's a difference between, being on a satellite team versus being a factory rider because, it's the status that you carry. And 14 points back, riding on a satellite Aprilia for Iogura with the Trackhouse team, that's really good for him. And Joe, I do wonder, given how, Trackhouse Aprilia, has seemed to really up this game this year in MotoGP, and given how competitive our bikes are, and seeing where Iogura is in the standings right now, and also his teammate Raul Fernandez, it makes me wonder, Joe, could Iogura be making a mistake going to Yamaha?
And that's key. You got something going great with Aprilia right now and those bikes that they're supplying to Trackhouse Racing. You're making the best of this situation. Second place, I know people will say, well, look at what Jorge Martín did with Ducati years ago when he claimed that championship. But remember, that is a rare feat. For Iogura to be in second place in the championship right now, I think he is a championship caliber driver, and he could be a contender. He's proving it. The big key is what's going to happen with Yamaha and everyone as we enter the regulations for 2027. These new simplified bikes where you're going to have less aero moving parts, whole shot out devices. Try to put it more into the rider's hand. Will Yamaha have something good? I got an idea. Aprilia is going to be looking really good. I think Ducati's going to be good. Can't count on KTM. But then a Yamaha. They must be showing something to track over Iogura and saying, look, we know we're not where we want to be right now. But when it comes to next year, we got something good going. It's still a big leap of faith, Kobe. The fact that he is having a great season with Trackhouse. And Trackhouse is not just a satellite team. Of course, they have Justin Marks, a big effort internationally. So not only the MotoGP side, but of course, state side with NASCAR. I think they have a lot of resources, and they're showing like, hey, we could be a competitive satellite team, which is great because there's other teams that, I mean, The fact that we're looking at Dim second in the points, and then Raul Hernandez, I believe, was sixth in the points. That's an impressive feat to have both riders, yep, right there, in the top 10 when you've seen other riders, including factory riders like Pedro Acosta, who has been falling behind. Um, Bagnaia, another factory rider, also behind. I mean, Fabio Di Gianantonio, with his poor performance, he could have easily fell out of the top 5. So it's it is a bit of a head scratcher, but it's just one of those deals where we just know at times, whether it's here or other series, paper just looks like a bigger, better move because you're going to that factory team, but that factory team may not have it. And the way Yamaha has been, I still don't think they have it. If anything, maybe Yamaha is saying, we're going to try to make the bike around you, Agura, and let's make that work. But it's still a leap of faith.
Yeah, definitely a huge leap of faith. I know, like I said, it's a big deal to become a factory rider and all of that. But I wonder if you're in a competitive situation right now, like, I wonder why you would consider leaving. What's obviously a great opportunity right now with the Superfoul Trackhouse team, and going to a manufacturer that's frankly been out to lunch for the last several years. We know Fabio Quartararo, who's down in 14th in the points. We know he hasn't forgotten how to ride a MotoGP bike. But yeah, I feel like Yamaha has completely, taken away his ability to be competitive in the last several years because the bikes just have not been good at all. And looking at the manufacturer standings the constructor standings right now in MotoGP, at the moment, Aprilia got 310 points. Ducati has 294. So in the constructors right there, it's a really close battle at the top because Aprilia and Ducati, they're just trading off of each other right now, going back and forth. That's a fun battle. And then at 177, got KTM kind of middle of pack there. And then we got Honda at 101 and then Yamaha with 60. Yeah, when you look at the difference between 177 to 101 and 101 to 60, it shows you how bad Yamaha has been this season, and not just this year, the last few years as well. So Iogura and Jorge Martín, the championship leader, who are going to be going to that factory team next year. Yamaha must have given them something really promising for next year's regulations to try to sign next year, or they just are, like I've said in the past, they brought out the Brinks truck to both of those guys, and they decided to either take the money or the project next year looks extremely promising, because when you bring in a brand new regulations set, Joe, it's going to offer a hard reset. Some of the teams and manufacturers have been struggling during this current regulation cycle. If they hit it off right next year, they could potentially, take off, and maybe we see the resurgence of Yamaha next year. So maybe it could be a really good change for Iogura and, his future teammate Jorge Martín, but it could also, come back to bite them if Yamaha is where they are this year. We could see two guys who are at the top of the championship this year be, mid-pack or towards the bottom next year.
And that's the one thing I'm wondering, if Yamaha is saying, look, we have the resources. I mean, Ducati obviously is going to have more resources than KTM. Pedro Acosta made that move. Aprilia, they're saying we're going to have the resources compared to the satellite teams. We hope we get a good bike from Aprilia, Ducati. But we've seen times teams that have those resources, that have the funding, and then they bring a dud to the grid. I mean, the biggest example I think most people are looking at across motorsport world is Aston Martin, Adrian Newey, new complex, Fernando Alonso, great experienced driver, and their car has just been miserable. Case of MotoGP, it'll be interesting to see what all happens when it comes to next year, the regulations, and when people shows up for testing, where everyone's speeds are.
Yeah, for sure. Where you're definitely gonna be paying attention to everything that happens over the off season into next year's regulation cycle. Like you said, you're gonna have less move and arrow, and the hope is to try to put this more into the the riders' hands, instead of making it be like, oh, you need to be on this factory bike to be competitive, or this bike or that bike. But if you're like on one of the independent teams' bikes, but oh, you're not going to be as competitive. But with next year's regulations, the hopes is to decrease the gap between the factory teams and your independent satellite teams. And if the regulations work out to perfection, hopefully that will make it a lot more competitive moving forward in the future.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if it'll make it where it is more competitive, or as we've seen in other times before, one team finds a loophole, pulls away. We saw that a few years ago with F1. Braun F1, of course, did that. But then we've seen other times where it gets really close. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shapes up. Let's switch over to IMSA, Canadian Tire Mosport Park. LMP2, GTD Pro and GTD, Tom Dillman and Jeremy Clark won LMP2 Inter Europool competition Orica LMP 207, and they started from the pole. You look at GTD Pro, Vasher Sullivan racing number 14 Lexus, Ben Barnicoat, Jack Hawksworth, they started 6th place, went out to get that win. Then GTD, Windward racing of Russell Ward and Philip Ellis in their Mercedes took the win. And this race, watching it, physical, it was hot. We saw mistakes on the track. We saw penalties. Seemed like quite a bit of action overall. And you have a winner from pole, 4th, and 6th in their respective class. Which team impressed you the most with their win?
Oh, well, when you're looking at all three classes, it'd be easy to say that all three were impressive, but I think the most impressive to me has to be for the overall win, because this is not just another LMP2 class victory for inter-Europol competition. It's also a story of redemption for the lead driver who took the checker flag, Tom Dillman. Because remember, Joe, 1 year ago at this race at Canadian Tire Mosport Park, Tom Dillman was in position to win this thing. And he ended up having a massive shun off course into the tire barrier, and they ended up, having to get him out of the car and put him onto the stretcher and take him to the hospital. And he was later diagnosed with a broken back. Yeah, and to come back to the same track 1 year later, where a win slipped away after a terrible crash, to come back in 2026 to get the overall win. Thought that was a real great story of redemption for Tom Dillman, and I'm sure whatever happened last year, he's certainly at peace with everything that happens, and sure make the win even sweeter, because this is the track he got hurt at last year. It didn't deter him, and he drove a great race. That inter-Europol competition had a really great strategy going on, and Jeremy Clark, who's the gentleman driver in that lineup, did a solid job as well during the opening stint. Was extremely fast, and I thought the team executed to perfection.
Executed to perfection overall. I thought it was really great to see how that race all played out. And overall, the competition level, it was still pretty close. We didn't see really a team run away, get that far ahead. Fierce battling overall. I mentioned that it was hotter, and some of the drivers were talking about how it was much harder than usual. Do you feel that was a contribution? It just seemed like the racing was a little bit more treacherous compared to years past, especially when it was overcast. The racing overall, do you think that was a big impact, the more hotter than usual day?
I honestly don't think it had a major impact on what we saw. I just thought, it's just the fact that Canadian Tire Mosport Park, the way the track is built, and you got three classes, in action. This is an old school racetrack as well, so there's very little room for error. I thought the multi-class racing aspect of it made it more intense, especially at the start when you have all your gentleman drivers in there mixed in with the pros. In the LMP2 and the GTD class, you have your gentleman drivers, or really young inexperienced drivers in the car to start the race, and then you have your factory drivers in the GTD Pro ranks. I guess you're just clutching your pearls and just holding on for dear life during the early stages of the race. As the lesser experienced drivers, or drivers who don't race for a living per se, are out there, trying to navigate through traffic. And I'm sure some of the factory GT drivers were really nervous when those LMP2 guys, were trying to make their way past them during the early stages of the race. But once we got all the pros in there, I think, it settled down, quite a bit. And I do think our gentleman drivers in IMSA do a really great job for the most part, to not cause any significant issues out there on the racetrack. But I think, some of the intensity we saw during the early portion of the race, Joe, it was just the fact that, you need to know where to pass on this racetrack, because there are certain spots on the track where it's not a good idea to try to make an overtake. And I thought the drivers for the most part did a great job with that. Yes, I know we saw a few incidents, but it wasn't like like a caution breeds cautions type of race.
And that's what I thought was going to happen early on. We saw Toby Lukta over in TDS Racing crashed early in the LMP2. I believe it was like about 75 laps into that race. But then the rest of the race, I mean, we had I believe a couple other safety cars. Maybe for I remember one point where we saw LMP2 car in the barriers that kept going. Were you so surprised on how we had quite a lot of vehicles still running towards the end of the full race?
No, I'm not really surprised by that. Because like I say, the drivers for the most part, ran a clean race, all things considered. And the fact is, that when you look at IMSA today compared to what it used to be in the past, these vehicles are strong and bulletproof, and you don't really see as many reliability issues that you might have seen maybe about 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I feel like the driving talent is at an all-time high. It's like, as the years go on, the quality of talent you see from the field just goes up and up and up, especially from the gentleman drivers. Like I say, some of these guys, they don't race for a living. Like Toby, you mentioned, who I will admit he's had quite a handful of difficult races in IMSA's LMP2 category. Toby's actually the CEO of Shopify, so he doesn't do this for a living, and this is like his fun recreational activity that he does on the side. Just like a lot of other gentleman drivers. Like I know we like to joke about doctors and dentists and stuff like that, but some of these guys, they do have like careers outside of racing. And to see the gentleman drive like a PJ Hyatt at AO Racing, and despite the Dragon card, he's truly gotten better as the years goes on. I know he started racing a lot later in his career, and to see drivers like him, and a few other gentleman drivers in the category continue to step up their game, it only strengthens them. So like in the past, you had a gentleman driver, that was like a large gap between the gentleman driver and then your paid pro driver in the lineup. But it seems like now, the gap is still quite a bit, but it's not like it was. It's certainly gotten a lot closer over the years. Or although he wasn't in this race, he was racing in the FIA World Endurance Championship race down in Brazil at Interlagos for the 6 hours of Sao Paulo. I mean, sometimes you'll get a gentleman driver like Ben Keaton, who's like right up there with the factory guys. It just shows that although this is not their day job per se, they put in the work to make sure that they're performing at the highest level.
Yeah, it's impressive to see what they're doing out there. And, anytime somebody's driving a race car part-time because they're working full-time somewhere else, finishing the race, that's something else. Always a big effort. I want to bring up a driver. IndyCar drivers will recognize the name. Callum Ilott, 24th overall, 9th in class, Wright Motorsport. Everyone's familiar with the story. Last year, full-time. This year, not full-time at IndyCar, adjusting to sports car racing after many years of single-seaters with IndyCar, the F2 Series, Road to F1, all that. And rumors about Wright Motorsport and how they're looking at expanding an international racing program. Do you think this might be something for a good fit for Callum Ilott to, hey, sports car racing, especially with Wright Motorsports? Or do you think he might still be looking at single-seaters?
When you look at where the silly season reporting is going right now in the IndyCar series, you don't really see Callum Ilott's name being mentioned in many of those reports, but when he is mentioned, he's like considered like to be like an outside possibility and potentially get another opportunity. And I think that Callum Ilott in his career progression, he's one of the most unluckiest guys I've seen in IndyCar in quite some time, because he always seems to find himself in some unfortunate situations. I know when he got in full time with Hunko's Hollinger race, and seemed like that would be a good fit for him. And then I felt like they did him kind of dirty at the end of that tenure, because he was let go very late in free agency, and then he was held where he couldn't talk to other teams. And by the time he was actually let go, he wasn't able to find a seat because all the seats were taken. And then he got, an incredible opportunity to race with Aaron McLaren at the Indy 500, and he did a really great job in that race because I remember he started in the pits because they had an issue with the car, and then he drove all the way from the back and ended up getting a very strong result for the team. And Tony Kanaan recently did a sit-down interview. I think it was either with Bob Pockrass or David Lamb, but in that interview, Tony Kanaan was talking about how Aaron McLaren and like to basically go through driver after driver and all of that, and he spoke about Callum Ilott situation, and he said that they had a really good driver in Callum Ilott who did a good job for them in Indy, but the only reason why Callum did not get a great opportunity to Aaron McLaren because the team and the sponsors wanted one driver in that seat throughout the season. That's how we got Nolan Siegel in that car. That Callum, at the time his priority was in the World Endurance Championship. He was racing with the Hertz Team Jota organization that's currently racing the Cadillacs. At the time when Callum was there, they were building a customer Porsche 963 prototype, and at the time that was his priority. So he could theoretically get called away to focus on his WC program instead of Power Tours and IndyCar, and that's why he lost that opportunity. And we know he went to Prema last year in IndyCar, and that was only a single season project, and he is still under contract by Prema, and that really hurt his opportunity to find a seat this year. So I would love to see Callum go to IndyCar. I believe if he got the right opportunity, he could potentially be around for quite a while in this series. I think he certainly has the talent to be in IndyCar. He just needs to be in a good seat and find a stable opportunity where he can really maximize his talent. It's been unfortunate that he hasn't been able to stick in this series so far. But in regards to what you're saying, Joe, about sports cars, they were talking about him on the broadcast today. Obviously, they were talking about how Callum has had to take a minute to adjust his driving style because he's used to single seaters, and if you drive single seaters, the transition to a prototype, almost seamless because the driving style is almost similar to a single seater. So he probably would feel more at home in an LMP2 or a GTP car. But GT, in a Porsche, that's a completely different animal. And Callum, he's had a struggle trying to adapt to this Porsche, and as we saw, he had a crash. I believe it was in practice over the weekend and damaged the car. But ended up keeping it out of the barriers today, thankfully. And honestly, Joe, I'm not really sure where his career path will go, but given how unstable it's been in IndyCar, I think it's probably in his best interest to keep all options available. Whether he can find an opportunity to go back in IndyCar, whether he can get an Indy 500 one-off, or maybe stay with Wright Motorsports and whatever they're going to do, because you talk about them expanding that. They were talking about potentially switching manufacturers next season, so they could potentially be building a new GT car, and it'll be interesting to see if Callum is going to stay with this team, or maybe he'll attract other teams in the GT ranks or even the prototypes.
Yeah, I'll be very interested in follow what Callum Ilott does next year. I know we talked about last week and how IndyCar is like the most hardest series to land a ride. Of course, Grid Tonight will be following it. Big story from last week, of course, was the McLaren trio. So let's see what happens. Fastest laps by class in IMSA: Sebastian Alvarez on lap 74 for LMP2, Ben Barker for GTD Pro on lap 16, and Roman DeAngelis on lap 115 for GTD. And of course, Jeremy Clark and the team there with Tom Dillman. Enter Europol competition. Der Orica won the race. 2 hours and 40 minutes of competition, the Chevrolet Grand Prix at Canadian Tire Mosport Park. A lot of Chevrolet talk, but let's go to a series where Ford just been dominating it.
Yeah, in the Repco Supercars Championship, the title battle appears to be wide open after the Townsville 500. We had 3 races and 3 different winners, with Cam Waters taking race 1. Matt Payne got race 2, and then Brody Kostecki finally got one after being quick all weekend in race 3. And after Townsville, looking at the championship standings, Matt Payne is the championship leader over Brock Feeney, who lost his championship lead. Then you have Brody Kostecki, Waters, and Kai Allen to round out the top 5. And when you look at the top 5, only 317 points separate them, with a maximum of 300 points each race weekend. And we're gotten so used to Triple Eight, just being the team to beat every single weekend. But it seems like this year that has truly changed, and Triple Eight no longer is your overall favorite to go win supercars races week in and week out. But the interesting thing, we do have four drivers from 4 different teams in the top 5. And oddly enough, Penrite Racing is the one team with 2 drivers in the top 5. So, Joe, I want to ask you, what do you make of this year's championship battle in supercars? Usually, you get one guy who starts, being the one, kind of like in years past, you'd have like a Shane Van Gisbergen when he was the guy, and then the year when Brody Kostecki won the championship, he was the guy. And like last year, you might have been like, hey, Brock Feeney is probably going to be the guy at most race weekends, but this year, although the top 5 separated by 317 points, it really seemed like there is no clear championship favorite in supercar, which is really odd.
It is very odd, and it just makes it where I know when it comes to the championship battle, it just seems wide open, which is something we're not used to, but got me excited about it. The fact that Matthew Payne is leading this championship season, I was probably on the same boat where a lot of people were anticipating Brock Feeney was going to avenge everything that happened at Adelaide, come back, dominate, and try to lead the championship series up until the countdown. However, that's not really the case. Brock Feeney, 92 points behind. Still ways to go, but when you look at Brock Feeney and his overall season, it's not exactly what they wanted. I mean, I think he's at that level now where he is coming out wanting to get those wins week after week after week. He's with AAA Racing. That is what he's expected to do. But now we're seeing, where this year, when it comes to the supercar series with that Ford Mustang, I mean, look at his last results: 5th, 7th, 14th. Okay, 2 top 10s, but this is a team where they were anticipating podiums because we saw Sydney, round 16, he got that win. The race before, a 2nd place. 4th place, then a 3rd place. But this is where we're seeing where, okay, the competition has risen up. I mean, Brody Kostecki, he is up there. I mean, that livery this weekend, though, with the yellow, I really enjoyed that from the show cars. Cam Waters, I feel he's always a driver where he has a good race weekend. He could get the job done, but sometimes just the execution does not go well. And Kai Allen, 5th place. Hey, that was a driver I did not anticipate. While you see drivers like Will Brown, a little further behind Ryan Wood, Chaz Mostert, I anticipate they'll be a little higher, but of course, Toyota, brand new manufacturer, that's always going to be a challenge. So overall, the championship battle, it is exciting. I think it's really fun to see what's all going to happen. Really curious, though, like, will people start thinking, Kobe, like, do we really need to have this mini playoff system? Because now we're having a season where it looks like it could go down to one of these 5 drivers, and really Anthony Pasquale, don't count him out if he gets a strong run. It just has me thinking.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about this because when you take away the Supercars finals on playoff format, it looks like we have an interesting championship battle setting up because you don't have one guy running away with it like you would under a full season points format, which is why they decided to add this finals format to try to make it more interesting and to generate storylines. Because in years past, you see one driver just running away with the thing and then be like, hey, on our wrap-up shows, like, we don't know what else to talk about because at the time SVG was there, and it was like, what more can you say about SVG? We just went out there and dominated the entire race, and there's really nothing else to talk about. But this year, from a pure standpoint, it seemed like that we have a lot of competition out there, and any one of those drivers in the top 5 right now, I believe, could be in contention to win this year's championship because you don't have anyone who is just stood out as the overall favorite. I think you could really pick any one of them, and that's very exciting. But when the points reset, once we in the regular season get into the finals, I think it's going to be a dogfight between the drivers at the top end. There's no telling who could come out on top and win this year's championship because, as we saw last year in the Adelaide Grand Final, it can all go wrong quickly, just as it did for Brock Feeney. It looked like he was going to have the advantage going into the weekend, but a bad race, and it was all over just like that. And speaking of AAA, I actually want to talk about them, Joe, because we wondered over the offseason when AAA switched to Ford from Chevrolet. We said sometimes when teams switch over to a different manufacturer that they could go through quite a bit of struggles. And at the start of the season, that wasn't true. AAA actually won the very first race of the season with Brock Feeney at Sydney Motorsport Park, and then ended up winning, I believe, 2 out of 3 of those races. And then we were thinking, maybe the switch to Ford is not going to be an issue for AAA. And we're thinking, oh, they're just going to keep winning at the same rate. But the funny thing is, as the season has gone on, Joe, AAA's performance has started to drop off a bit. I mean, like, not in a way like they're falling off a cliff or anything like that. It's just the fact that this team has been, so successful in supercars that even when they have the slightest bit of drop off in performance, you think something is wrong. We're used to seeing them win races and finish on the podium. If they just finish in the top 5 or top 10, when you look at AAA, that's unacceptable, by their standards. Because you expect them to be at the very top of the grid and the podium. And here's an interesting stat from James Pavey from Supercars.com. He said that it's been 5 races since AAA had a podium, and according to Supercars data analyst Scott Sinclair, it's the first time since 2007 that AAA has gone, at least 5 races without a podium. It's really crazy because that's almost 20 years later that that they've gone that long without scoring a podium. And Supercars show you how long they've been dominant. They said the team's longest streak since the start of 2005 is 8 races without a podium, and we only have a few races to go until it's going to be 20 years since they've had a podiumless streak. And I just want to ask you, Joe, like, what do you think is going on with AAA? I mean, in Townsville, they were awful in qualifying. All 3 races they qualified in. They qualified, mid pack, and for Will Brown case, he was like towards the back end for one of the races. So qualifying, they did not show up at all, did not have the single lap speed at all. But once the race came around, they seemed to take off, and they had speed in the race, not race winning speed, but they were able to salvage, some points here and there. So it wasn't a complete loss. But in supercars, just like any other racing series, track position is important. And if you bury yourself in qualifying, you're going to have a hard time trying to, make something out of nothing in the race. I mean, Brock didn't have a terrible Townsville, had a 10th, 8th, and a 6th place finish. That's a good point stay, but by AAA standards, you don't want to be finishing, just in the top 10. You want to be finishing in the top 5 and on the podium. And Will Brown, he had a good race weekend as well, coming home 7th, 6th, and 8th. So that was, drives for both of those guys to be proud of, considering the fact that they literally had no qualifying speed at all in Townsville.
Yeah, it seems when it comes to qualifying, that's where they're struggling, and that's where I feel this is where AAA and that Ford relationship might be having some issues, particularly when it comes to the qualifying effort, as in, okay, we need to do something, make the car better, make the team better, and more prepared for qualifying, because at the end of the day, besides the Bathurst 1000 or the other enduro races, you have short races. We're only talking about 60 laps in a very competitive track. Townsville, that track was a lot of fun to watch the racing this weekend. So overall, I just like where the competition is there. I think, Brody Kosecki, the guys there at Ford that have more years, they probably know a little bit more when it comes to qualifying. Maybe AAA is just pushing the limit too much and just trying something a little too different, and it doesn't pan out in qualifying. We're going to do that. We'd rather do that in qualifying. Racing pace, they probably refer to their racing notes, and then they start working around what they've been dealt with. But overall, I just wonder, Kobe, if Will Brown is a driver for AAA to long-term have. I mean, you look at his results, he only has really 2 podium finishes. Melbourne, that was the one. The round afterwards, the Super 440s, Tapu, 2 second-place finishes. The rest of the time, no podium finishes for Will Brown. It's just interesting to me. So I also wonder, and this is just something we talked about in many other forms of motorsport, if you have 2 drivers that are giving you great data, they're moving you forward. But if you have drivers that the data, the car just not working out, maybe you're missing something. So overall, I'm very curious to see how this all shapes up. And speaking about AAA, I'll pull up a couple of comments in the chat room. Kobe, should I remind you about AAA's history at Bathurst? They could get a podium there. I would say so too. I mean, you could start last there, have a clean race car, you get it on podium.
Yeah. I mean, Adam, I'm not saying that AAA is completely falling off a cliff and that they're a shell of their former selves. I think they're just going through a rough patch right now. Like I say, they started off the season, with the same speed they had when they were running the Chevrolets, and I thought everything was going to be fine. And it's just the fact, that they're not finishing on the podium like they have been as consistently as they have, and they're not winning almost all the races like they have. So um, they're still performing better than a lot of teams in the supercars paddock, so you got to give them that. It's just the fact that they've set the bar so high because of all of their victories and championships, all of their success. That when you've set the bar so high, when they even just slightly dip back in performance, it's people are going to view that as a disappointment. And Joe, your comment on Will Brown, I've wondered myself, like I'm thinking, when is it time to have a serious conversation about Will Brown? Yeah, I just wonder, like, when is it time to have a conversation about him? I mean, Will Brown's, some of his qualifying efforts this year have obviously been disappointing. Got those two podiums. You mentioned as well. Early on in the season, he's had some good consistent points finishes, but it's the fact that he's not finishing on the podium, and he's not winning races. I mean, we've seen Brock win a few races so far this year, but Will Brown still has not broken through and gotten to the top step of the podium in 2026. And outside of that championship he won in his debut season with the team, Will Brown hasn't exactly, I guess, lived up to the expectations of what you'd expect of a driver who is replacing SVG, who's a multi-time supercars champion. So I do wonder, if Will Brown does not, start performing up to the same level as Brock Feeney. I wonder if Triple Eight starts looking for a different driver. And I'm not talking about a different driver in their pipeline. I'm talking about, a driver from another team who could potentially do that, because I have to admit, Joe, I think Jackson Walls, who they're rushing, I felt like they kind of rushed him up from Super 2 into the Supercar Series, as you can see where he is right now in the points. He's 23rd, second to last out of the full-time drivers, so I don't really see him as a potential option to go into that seat. So I think they have to steal another top driver from another team if they decide to replace Will Brown. I do wonder if since Triple Eight is not performing where they should be right now, I wonder if they're going to give Will Brown time, to try to turn things around, or if they're going to decide that they need to start looking another direction. But after that winning that championship, it just seemed like that something's just been off on Will Brown's side of the garage.
100%. It just seems like it's been off, not performing, not being that championship caliber driver. Because I really anticipated after he won the championship, he will be the top guy to defend the championship the following season. We didn't see that. We seem to be anticipating more from him because he got in that championship. He proved before he made the switch he was a top caliber driver. He just doesn't seem like that, and it makes me wonder what's missing. It almost gives me a little bit of memories of when Jimmy Vasser won that championship with Chip Ganassi Racing in kart, just as Alex Zanardi was starting to get a driver of his own, and the following year Zanardi was the top driver to beat. Vasser was there, but the winners were not coming like they used to. And then Vasser was with Chip Ganassi for quite some time until finally Chip Ganassi said, we got to make a switch. You're going to Patrick Racing. Overall, I think when it comes to AAA racing, they have to have this conversation too of what's going on. Why aren't you getting the results we expect from you? You could say, well, look, I'm right there. I'm seventh. I'm in the top 10 in the points. That's going to be good for the finals. Well, we're AAA racing. It doesn't take long before the other teams will catch up to them. You got to perform. You got to help us help you. Give us that data. Give us where we can make the car better. We could innovate. Just because we're a Ford first year doesn't mean we have to settle for, we're just first year with the manufacturers, we're not getting it. I would not be surprised if AAA tries to make a move on another driver. I can only imagine, though, they would want a driver with a championship already. And, of course, when you look at drivers with a championship, Chaz Monster pops up. But will he be willing to make that switch? I think it's easy for any driver in Supercar Series. Opportunity with Triple Eight, sold. Sign me up. That Red Bull livery, that sponsorship, the resources they have. But Chaz Monster, how likely will he be recruited to stay here? We got something good going. We're trying to build a Toyota program. Just really curious, Kobe. Like, is Chaz Monster potentially like a driver they could be eyeing if they decide to move away from Will Brown?
I'm actually not thinking Chad Moss. I'm actually thinking his teammate Ryan Wood would be the better option. But then again, him and Brock Feeney had the rivalry going on for the last several months after Ryan Wood effectively, took away Feeney's chance to win the championship. And I know it's always difficult, putting two guys who don't like each other, in the same lineup, but I think given how fiery those two are, I think they could potentially push each other and bring out the best version of themselves. And I know Chaz right now is actually almost on the bubble of not making the finals after winning the championship last year. I don't think it has anything to do with Chaz's abilities as a race car driver. I think it just has a lot to do that the factory Toyota program there is not where it should be right now. And I think Chaz is excited about the potential opportunities that could open up for him in the future, because Chaz has been on the record saying that, being with Toyota now opens up a lot of opportunities outside of supercars. As we saw him, he raced the IMSA race on the streets of Detroit. Yeah, so he could always, drive a Lexus anytime he wants, anywhere around the world if they have an opportunity, whether it's IMSA, the World Endurance Championship, one of the GT World Challenge Series. A lot of opportunities there for Chaz Mostert if he wants to, or even potentially, could he get a ride with the Toyota team in NASCAR, do a one-off on a road or a street course. That's very appealing, and that's why the Matt Payne wants to get that's why he got into that contract dispute with his Penrite Racing team and Chevrolet, because Matt Payne wants to have opportunity to race outside of supercars, and you remember he wanted to race for RCR at Sonoma, but Ford in Australia and Penrite they declined to let him drive a Chevrolet as a Ford driver, because we know Ford right now, they don't have many opportunities for supercars drivers in NASCAR who want to do one-off on the road and the street courses. But getting back to what we are talking about, I do think if Triple Eight was looking at a driver to potentially replace Will Brown in the lineup, I think they will look more so at a Ryan Wood than they would a Chaz Mostert, because Ryan Wood, I think he's gotten screwed out of a lot of good finishes because for whatever reason on his side of the garage, reliability seems to be a concern. I know there's obviously been some mistakes on the racetrack as well, but a lot of the misfortune that Ryan Wood has faced has been totally out of control. Is due to like some stupid part failure on his car, and it always seems like it always bites his side of the garage and not Chaz's.
Yeah, it just seems like Chaz's side, okay. Ryan Wood's side, I don't know. Maybe he's getting the experimental parts or something that are just making it not work. In the comments, rumors that Chevrolet CEO wants a Chevy Cup driver to be a wildcard driver at Supercars Adelaide Grand Finale 2026. Of course, that's the final round. Favorites: Larson, Elliott, Zillage, Alden Marquez to do it. I got to be honest. I feel maybe Zillage out of that group, especially.
Yeah. I'm thinking Zillage should not, because given how given how his rookie season has gone in the Cup Series so far, you could argue that he should probably stay stateside and focus on improving in the Cup Series and logging all the laps and making sure his second year goes a lot better than his first, because it's been absolutely brutal for him. Year one as a NASCAR Cup Series driver. I mean, I think if you sent him into supercars to do a wild card entry, I think he has the ability to perform extremely well. But it would be a fun extracurricular for him and maybe a confidence builder one. But you really have to ask, like, given how poorly things have gone for him at the Cup level so far this year, does he really need to be focusing on an extracurricular like this? You could argue that he should probably focus on getting better in the Cup Series first before you go out and race and other series. And Kyle Larson, he was actually set to do a wild card with Chevrolet a couple of years ago, but he was like so distraught and distressed, from the process of doing the Indy 500 that wore on him so much that he was like, I don't want to do it at all. And I think Chase Elliott, it would be fun to have him be in supercars too, because he's obviously the most popular driver in NASCAR, and if Chase Elliott is racing in Australia, his large fan base will find a way to watch supercars and Adelaide. And I do know the article you're referencing, Jamie. I saw it myself several weeks ago that Chevrolet is looking to try to attract a top NASCAR driver to come to a wild card Adelaide, similar to the program that Tickford did last year for Austin Cindric. And Tickford has already confirmed that they're not going to be doing a NASCAR wild card program this year. So if we're going to see another Cup driver go down under to race in the Adelaide Grand Final, will probably come from the Chevrolet camp. And I do think those three would be really good candidates for it.
All right. My internet seemed to cut out for a second, so just got back. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Now that you say all that, Kobe, that with Zillage, the way his season's going, just focus on getting the season done, building your confidence up. It might be a fun idea to go out and explore other series, but oh man, just the way he's been going. I mean, I swear, the luck he has, Kobe, either he's gonna have a horrible weekend, not do good, or worst case scenario, has a great weekend, but then injures himself during celebration, which is just bad luck. So, plenty of supercars discussion. Let's move on to our next topic, where we revisit a little bit of MotoGP, particularly with the grid ranking.
Yeah, for sure. And so far, all of our grid ranking series have run, except for one, which is the NASCAR Cup Series, which is coming up at the very top of the hour. So we're starting to run short on time here, and we'll start to speed things up as we want to be off the air before the green flag flies at Echo Park Speedway for Sunday night under the lights. But looking at the grid ranking, where the provisional ranking stands, Matt Payne and Brody Kostecki are in the top 10 from supercars, but we don't have any MotoGP riders in the top 15, which may be a big surprise to some. But back in week 4, we had Marco Bezzecchi leading the grid ranking and approaching week 15. Not even in the top 15. So Joe, we know the story with Marco Bezzecchi. The crashes we've seen, the suspension for smacking the marshal in the face twice. Now he has the injury and the surgery, and he'll have to recover. So, how do you think Marco Bezzecchi can rebound and improve his position in the grid ranking?
End of the day, when he comes back, I think he has to focus on do what you've been doing before you've had this string of bad luck, and that is go out there, focus, and get the win. It's easier said than done. I get it, but this was a rider that he won 5 races in a row, Grand Prix races, starting with the last 2 of last season, the first 3 of this season. He dominated, swept the race weekend in Italy. That could have been the high moment of the season. And okay, now the rest, just go out there, do what you need to do. That's what he needs to revert back to. I'm curious if the pressures of the championship leader are getting to him, especially after he got suspended for essentially slapping a race marshal. This is not the time to start having these, making things harder for yourself. This is a time to really just focus on what you've been doing to get yourself from the lead. And now, falling down to 4th in the standings, still, you're only talking about 22 points for Marco Bezzecchi. Still doable, but now you got Marc Márquez ahead of you. He has to really clear his mind, get the team to rally behind him, and I think they could get something going good where they'll respond back. But the consistency has to be there, the commitment of making good races, good efforts. You cannot have a bad weekend in MotoGP anymore and anticipate you'll come out, because even if you have some good race weekends, you got the sprint. You got a teammate, Jorge Martín, that proved if I do good in the sprints and you are inconsistent, I'll steal that championship from you. So for Marco Bezzecchi, this recovery, I'm hoping he takes some care about himself and just try to clear his mind with everything going on.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really crazy because at the start of the season, Marco Bezzecchi, he crescendo went up, and now his stock is starting to go way down. And I will not be buying any Marco Bezzecchi stock anytime soon unless he's able to turn around his poor form and poor run that he's been on lately. And it really seemed like that the high point of his downfall was that suspension. Because, since then, it seems like, things have not really gone as well as you'd expect for him, Marco Bezzecchi. And now that he's out injured, he's obviously going to lose out in the championship battle if he has to miss multiple races. And and also in the grid ranking as well, is not going to be able to improve his position and get back towards the top. So hopefully he'll be able to come back from all of that.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if he could come back from all that. I think at the end of the day, it'll be very interesting to see how the second half of the season goes in MotoGP. Let's revisit IMSA, because we know they're part of the Grid Endurance Performance Index. So we'll see updated scores, but we won't see GTP get scored because Daytona Prototype, they did not race. So at the end of the day, you only had essentially you had LMP2, GTD, and GTD Pro. So would GTP, Grand Touring Prototype, on Mosport be a good idea? Because this is a track where I know for US fans we don't talk about it much, but they've hosted F1 long ago. Of course, they've hosted NASCAR, and they even have done IndyCar. The way the track, the elevation changes, and anything, do you think that could be a great addition?
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we've seen IMSA's top category racing at Canadian Tire Mosport Park. I mean, I don't recall from my memory. I don't think we've seen GTP, this current Formula prototype racing, compete at Canadian Tire Mosport Park. But I know we saw the DPIs there. We saw the Daytona prototypes there. In the past, and always put on a really good show. I mean, I understand IMSA wanting to give LMP2 teams, I guess the headliner, to be the main story, because when you have GTP there, we rarely talk about LMP2 unless they're causing a incident or a full course caution. That's really the only time you'll really hear about LMP2 on the broadcast for the most part. So for them to be able to have their own standalone race, I guess that was appealing to all the LMP2 team owners and sponsors. So I guess maybe this is a one-off where they want to try to keep those teams happy. But I think if you're able to bring the GTPs there, that would be incredibly exciting to see the top category rate racing at Canada. That's an idea I would support. In the future, bringing the GTP category and IMSA's top class back to Canada, because I think those GTPs will put on an exciting show around the different corners. And in turns they have at this incredible Canadian circuit. So I wonder if that's something that IMSA will consider in the future. But since next year's schedule is clearly out and is set to be another LMP2 headliner, it seems like IMSA really wants to keep the teams and the sponsors happy in LMP2, where they can get their premier event of the year. Kind of like when we go to VIR, the GTs get their own show, and this one is for LMP2.
Yeah, LMP2, they got the show here. I would love to see GTP come over here as well, too. I think that'll be a lot of fun to race. But we'll see how the schedule all shapes up. A lot to discuss when it comes to scheduling, everything going on, and just the competition, too, because you have more races. Of course, fans will like that, but then it just sometimes become a grind. Then for the competition, it could be a grind as well, too, Kobe.
Yeah, for sure. And since we're getting close to the start of the NASCAR Cup Series race, we'll move on to our final section here, and we want to talk a little bit about the psychology of the competition that comes in motorsports. And when you're looking at MotoGP, Marc Márquez, we already know he is an accomplished rider, multi-time MotoGP World Champion, and he's really making a charge right now, and he is the absolute hunter. Last year when he was on top from the season, he was the hunted, but this year he is the hunter, and he is coming fast to try to catch Jorge Martín and Aprilia. And last year in Formula One, Lando Norris and McLaren nearly lost the drivers' championship to Max Verstappen, carrying the so-called Red Bull tractor on his back, and Lando and McLaren, being the hunted. If they had just one more race, that it would have been game over for McLaren in regards to the drivers' championship. And so, Joe, here's the question I have for you. Is there something about a team, driver, or rider that often finds themselves in a situation where they're being hunted and losing ground?
It seems like that happens a lot in motorsports. You mentioned, of course, about Verstappen last year. There was one more round, he probably could have gotten that. You look at MotoGP, Aprilia, they seem to be started off very fast. Marco Bezzecchi looked really hard to beat, especially at the Italian Grand Prix. I thought this could be his championship statement that this is my year. But now they're slipping. The points lead is gone. And who of all riders, is there coming back as now third in that champion? It is Marc Márquez, one of the top guns in MotoGP. For Formula One, we saw Max Verstappen. He was that driver that came back. It seems so often when a driver that is a level like a Verstappen, a Marc Márquez, they could rebound and claim their championship. It almost seems like that team that's leading does have a little bit of an issue of we're stumbling, we're losing ground. It reminds me also a little bit about what we saw back in 2020 when Fabio Quartararo and Yamaha started off really fast. They were winning, looked like championship contenders, but then mistakes, going off track, not finishing races. Juan Mir over in the Suzuki team claimed that championship away from them. So I am really curious if there is just something about, especially in motorsports, when you know the defending champion, a rider or driver that is capable of reclaiming that championship is coming up on you. It just seems like teams just start making more mistakes. I mean, I don't have to go into detail about everything McLaren did last year and the mistakes when it came to how the British Grand Prix went, the papaya rule mess. And this year, I think it's still McLaren showing us like we can't get our act together. It is interesting, Kobe. I feel like we hear sometimes people use the phrase, I'd rather be the hunter than the hunted. I just wonder if there's a point where these teams, they feel like, okay, we get a big enough lead, but then we start feeling the pressure of we have to do this again. We have to win again. I wonder if that's what got into Aprilia. That pressure of, hey, let's go out there, have a good race. We think we could go out there to win too. We have to go there to win. We have the best bike. We have this higher expectation. I mean, that's where I'm at, Kobe. I just feel like there is just something that the teams may not realize it, but maybe it's just something where this is just part of that aspect of motorsports, the psychology of it, where you start stumbling, you start making mistakes, and you have a person like Max Verstappen, Marc Márquez. I would even say in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton, if Mercedes keeps screwing up, he might be there because he's shown he hasn't fully lost his game yet. I know Alex Palou in IndyCar, he's always a contender to win. Those are the drivers and riders where you do not want to be leading the championship, coming to the stretch, and they're gaining on you. What is it that it just seems like teams find themselves in that situation? I just think this is just part of the mentality of motorsports.
Yeah, and when you look on the side of the hunted, some of them handle that better than others. And some of them they see whoever's coming behind them, gaining on them fast. And I think sometimes they just completely fold and fall apart because I think Aprilia Marc Márquez is better than the rider they have right now leading the championship, Jorge Martín. I think that would be a fair assessment that Marc Márquez is better than Jorge Martín, obviously. And then Ducati, Marc Márquez is riding that Ducati bike as best as he has. And given the fact that he's on a really good bike and he's arguably the greatest MotoGP rider of all time, when you have someone like that on your heels and they catching you in huge chunks, it's almost like in the mind you feel defeated, right? So although Marc Márquez is not there yet and past Jorge Martín in the rider standings, I really believe that that can cause a team like Aprilia, to make mistakes and start feeling the pressure to be like, oh no, he's going to get us. And in my opinion, it's not a matter of if Marc Márquez is going to take the championship lead. It's a matter of when he's going to do it because it seems like he just has all the momentum right now, and Aprilia, they have to feel helpless at this point because it's like, wow, that we're doing everything we can, and this guy is, he's going to inevitably catch us. You're just waiting for it to happen, and it's just really hard, Joe, to stay in a positive mindset when stuff like this happens. I think that's why you see a lot of teams, fold, because like you want to stay positive, obviously, but at the same time, you have to balance being positive with also being realistic and acknowledging reality. And I think the reality of the situation is that Aprilia is not going to be able to keep up with Marc Márquez if he stays healthy. I mean, Aprilia's best bet this season is at Marc Márquez. I'm not going to wish it on him, but his best bet that he goes out injured again and has to miss multiple races, and stops his forward climb. But if you have a Marc Márquez who can stay healthy long enough and continue to ride at this level, I just don't see how Aprilia is going to be able to keep up with MM93.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard battle for Aprilia, for their team. That a lot of them, it's their first time in such a situation. Oh boy, it's going to be a really intense battle for them, and seeing what all happens with Aprilia and MotoGP Championship. MM93. I mean, just saying that, I know that's his nickname because MotoGP does their initials and their number. That alone, I feel, strikes fear when it's like, that's a rider catching us.
Yeah, not just any rider, and not just a multi-time world champion, but one of the all-time greats of the sport. We may never see a rider as successful as Marc Márquez ever again. So I said, so you could very well be, competing against, I guess, their version of a Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, Jimmy Johnson, a Mario Andretti, a Scott Dixon, and Alex Palou. Some of the guys who are accomplished so much in their respective sports, or like a Michael Schumacher, a Lewis Hamilton. You could just go on and on talking about the all-time greats of respective racing series. And it's just a uncomfortable situation for a team like Aprilia to be in, or riders and a Jorge Martín or Marco Bezzecchi. That's the guy is coming for you, that you can see him coming with a head of steam, and there's like nothing you can do. It's kind of like standing in the road, and then here comes a dump truck at 60 miles per hour. Like, there's nothing you can do. You just have to just get out the way, right? It's inevitable. It's gonna happen. It's just a tough situation for those guys.
Tough situation for them, and it's just something where, I mean, motorsports, if you're going to be a championship contender, these are the big boys you're going to be racing against. When you get that far out and they start closing in, I think maybe that's where sort of the extra pressure builds, and we're not seeing the most of it, and they're still gaining on us. That could almost get to a point of panic, which I'm not saying they're panicking, but I think they're stressing out about this now.
Yeah, definitely a lot for them to stress about. And before we start stressing, Joe, and potentially going up against NASCAR Cup Series race tonight, I think we should get to our great one shining moment from this racing weekend, and let us know down in the chat, whether you're watching here live or on replay, what's the one thing that stood out to you the most from all the racing series that happened this weekend in the grid ranking or endurance performance index, whether it was MotoGP at the Sox and Rain, Supercars at Townsville, IMSA at Mosport, and we also had another EPI race this weekend, the 6 hours of Sao Paulo, Brazil, for the World Endurance Championship. So please let us know, and starting with you, Joe, what's your shining moment?
My shining moment is going to come from MotoGP, and it's actually going to go to a rider that got a podium, but he is hoping that podium helps his MotoGP future, Raul Hernandez. He is feeling really good. He said that his future in MotoGP is almost secure, because at the end of the day, what he's been able to do with Trackhouse racing, including that historic Trackhouse 1-2 finish the last race weekend, this young rider, I think he loves to get himself a good team next year. Will that be Trackhouse? We don't know. If he gets something with a factory team, that could be really huge too. But he has been getting himself some good podium finish. His podium at the Germany Grand Prix race weekend, despite riding with a painful back injury, I mean, he is really showing that he has potential. And I think in a series in MotoGP where it's so easy to think of just the top 5 or 6 riders and everybody else, I think he is definitely one of those riders you got to think of as one of the top 5. He just needs that opportunity. He's making the most of it. Him and his teammate with Trackhouse, I think he might have a good future ahead depending on where he ends up in silly season.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, Joe, I found it really hard to find one clear shining moment for me from this racing weekend, but I think I'll just give it to Tom Dillman from Inter Europol competition in IMSA because as I mentioned, he had a really scary crash last year and had to be stretchered off when he broke his back. And then he come back 1 year later and he's standing on the top step of the podium. I think that's an incredible comeback story for him. 1 year later at the track that ended up breaking his back, and he wasn't afraid that he went out there and drove just as quickly this year as he did last year. And it's always great to see those redemption stories take place in motorsports.
Always great to see a comeback story, redemption, all that in motorsports. And of course, there's going to be plenty more stories tomorrow. Grid Rising. We're going to have Tanner, Matthew recap the NASCAR Cup Series at Atlanta, plus all the racing throughout the world. And Kobe, Grid Tonight with Matthew and Josh. A big thank you to our investors in Patreon and YouTube paid membership, calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, Crystal, and Gloria. They all invest. Link in the video description to invest through Patreon or YouTube paid membership. And of course, when it comes to super chats on Buy Me a Coffee, Jamie leads that with 5 total this year. Everyone else has contributed at least 1. Jason has 3. We thank everyone for tuning in, of course, and follow us at Grid Network TV across social media and our website, gridnetworktv.com. Matthew will be working on his NASCAR recap article following the Quaker State 400 at Echo Park Speedway in Atlanta. For Kobe, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the race.